Hey, this is Rama from Creations Landscape Designs of the Fair Landscapes blog. Apologies for the noise you can hear in the background. Thursdays are gardening days in my condo complex. Anyway, in this video, I wanted to talk to you about 7 landscape design mistakes to avoid in the 2024 calendar year. But before I do that, I make videos about California native plants, landscape design, sustainability, a bit of art, and anything and everything in between. So if you'd like to get more of that content in your feed, then hit the red subscribe button. I've also got a goal that I need your help with. I am trying, before the end of this calendar year, to get to at least 10,000, if not more, YouTube subscribers. And also my goal is to get enough watch time hours to be able to monetize this YouTube channel so that I can use the money earned, whatever that may be, in order to be able to purchase better quality equipment to be able to make better quality videos for you. Because when I make these videos, all the expense comes out of my pocket. I'm also going to consider getting on Patreon. If you'd like to support me there, comment below if that's something you'd be interested in. And that being said, let's do this. The first design mistake to avoid is not understanding the site. What areas get a lot of shade? What areas get a lot of sun? Are there any plants that for whatever reason you'd like to keep? Maybe there's a large tree and you just don't have the funds to completely remove it because you're going to be spending your money elsewhere in the garden. Maybe one of your neighbors has a tree that is going to provide a lot of shade in your garden or has roots that have come over to your garden. These are all things that you're going to need to consider before you actually get into renovating your garden. And there's 2 ways to do this. The first and easiest way is to just make a list. Just get a pen and paper, make a list of 10, 20, whatever things in your garden, and just kind of have that in the back of your mind as you're designing, as you're going to figure out what plants you want to put into your space. The other thing is that you can do, and this is something that most designers will do, is let's say your garden is shaped like a rectangle. So here we have a rectangle. This is the property line. This is the door from the house that gets you to the outside, or the sliding glass door, whatever you have. And you basically bubble out the different areas that get sun or shade. You draw a circle. Okay, this area gets a lot of sun. You draw a small circle representing the neighbor's tree. It provides shade going this way. Or in this area, there's a root from that other neighbor's tree, or whatever. And you can write you have clay soil and whatever it is that's going on in your garden. But it is always imperative to understand the site that you are designing, because also, let's say, for example, you have poor grading, because whoever lived in this house before you didn't really do much to the landscape. So now the water comes this way towards your house instead of being flowing the other way. Those are things you need to make note of that you're going to need to make design considerations for. The second design mistake to avoid is not having a plan. Now, as designers, personally, I make very detailed 2-scale plans, typically at 1/8 inch scale. But that doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. Even if it means you roughly draw out your site on paper, at least you have something to look at, because then you can make copies of that plan or use tracing paper over top of it and draw out different ideas. And then that way you can play around figuratively on paper with different ideas before committing to one thing. Because I always provide 2 design options at the minimum for my clients, based on what they're looking for, based on what I think would work for this space, and based on what's already existing, and also, more importantly, based on how much they're realistically willing to spend. So let's say you want to put a pathway in your garden. On paper, you can play around with different layouts of pathways before finally committing to something. And that way, by that point, when you've committed to, I want a straight path from the front door to the street, at least you've drawn different options on paper and figured out what you like, as opposed to just doing something in the garden and then realizing, oh, maybe I should have done it differently. The third design mistake to avoid with your garden is not understanding the use of the garden. So go out into your backyard. Take a look. What is it that you want to do out there? Is it the kind of garden where you want to be able to entertain and barbecue and have some friends over and have a good time? Or is it the kind of garden where you want to play bocce ball? Or is it the kind of garden where you and your spouse just want to be able to hang out and you don't need a custom built barbecue because you don't really barbecue and that's not your thing? You need to understand what is the purpose of the garden. What is it that you want to do? Maybe you want to have edible plants. I did a design for a homeowner in Tustin, and she had 2 different purposes for her garden. The front yard was going to be the California native garden with a swale and a dry creek bed running through the garden. That was the focus of the front. And in the backyard, we installed, well, not me, but the contractor installed 4 raised beds, fruit trees, an area with decomposed granite for the kids to kind of run around and play. And having an exclusively native garden was not the focus of the backyard. The backyard focus was mainly for edible gardening and play. So that's what we did. And in her side yard, the contractor installed some rain tanks so she could collect whatever Mother Nature was going to give her. But at least she was clear intended on what she wanted from her garden. Her front yard was not going to be anything where she was going to be out there drinking a cup of coffee. Nah, she could do that in the back. And the main purpose of the front yard was just a casually beautiful native garden. Because when you understand what you want to do with your garden, it'll also help you in design. It'll also help if you're trying to work with a designer to understand what your purpose is. The 4th design mistake that I suggest you avoid making, and this is going to be controversial, and that is not considering the drought. In my personal opinion, we're still in a drought. We still need to conserve water. Yes, Mother Nature has been very generous to us in what she's been able to give us, but unfortunately, that's not enough. We still need more. And I highly recommend, if you're considering any plants in your garden, first consider native plants. Second, consider at least California-friendly plants that are drought tolerant. And when I say native plants, I'm not talking about putting in cactus. No, there's tons and tons and hundreds of green year-round beautiful native plants that you could use. But the point is that when you have a garden that doesn't need much water, that needs minimal maintenance, it's better for your wallet because then you're not wasting a lot of water, but it's also better overall for the environment and for the local wildlife. The 5th design mistake that I suggest you avoid making in regards to how you plant your garden is either on the one spectrum having way too many plants. And what I mean by this is having so many plants that in a year it becomes a maintenance nightmare and it looks really overcrowded, or on the opposite spectrum having too few. Now, I'm a minimalist. I like the idea of not having a maximalist looking home, but I also in the landscape like the idea of having the appropriate number of plants. And there isn't really one magic number, but if let's say you have 1,000 square foot garden, you want more than just 5 plants in your garden. And what you also want to make sure of is you don't have 100 different varieties in your garden. It's always better to have fewer varieties with more quantities of each variety than to have one of each everything, because that's just going to look like a mess. The 6th design mistake that I think you should consider avoiding when you're renovating your landscape is not considering for seasonal interest and visual interest. What I mean is some plants are only going to bloom in the springtime. So what you want to make sure of is however many plants you have in your garden, that every season something is happening. You might want to put a plant that flowers in the spring, but then one that flowers in the fall or winter or summer, so that every season something is happening. But you also want to consider each plant in and of itself. There's so many different textures of green. There's so many different shapes. There's so many different feels to the plant. The other thing is not accounting for visual interest. So let's say you have a 1,000 square foot garden and all you put in your garden is plants that are 3 feet tall, then it's just going to be one level and it's just going to look boring. And typically in design, what we do as designers is we have different levels and heights of plants to create visual interest. It's beneficial to make the garden visually appealing, but also make it so that every season you get to enjoy the garden in some way. Whether that's a plant that has a beautiful scent or whether that's different flowers that bloom in different parts of the year. The 7th design mistake that you should avoid making is not considering the local wildlife. I tell my clients what you do to your landscape, especially if you have actual plant material, means that the local birds, butterflies, bees, hummingbirds, they're going to come to your house and party at your house. In my home, I have a 100 square foot pad of concrete right outside my front door, and that's essentially my garden. So all I can do is garden in pots. And the one specific plant I have multiple places in my garden is the Gambilia Gentiana Grand Canon Baja Bush Snapdragon. It's got kind of a light red flower, and the hummingbirds love it. I have a lizard. I've named it Lizzie. It hangs out in my garden. I have bees that occasionally come to my garden. I have wildlife coming into my garden because I provided the plants that they like. If you provide the flowering plants that they like, not only are you going to have beautiful flowers to look at, but the local wildlife is legit going to come party at your house.